Most people spend more money feeding their soil than they do feeding themselves. And that right there is the quiet contradiction almost no one talks about. I spent years buying bags of fertilizer thinking I was doing the right thing, thinking my plants needed it, thinking the garden center knew better than I did. Then one spring I stopped. Not because I ran out of money, but because I finally paid attention to what was actually happening in my own backyard. That year, my garden didn't just survive, it produced more food than any season before it. The tomatoes were heavier, the greens were darker, the peppers kept coming long after I expected them to quit. I didn't add anything, I actually took something away and everything changed. The fertilizer industry has done something very clever over the past few decades. They convinced us that soil is empty, that it needs to be filled, that without their products, nothing will grow. But soil is not empty. Soil is one of the most complex living systems on the planet, and when you start dumping synthetic nutrients into it, you don't strengthen it, you interrupt it. You bypass the biology that was already working, and over time you make your garden dependent on inputs it never actually needed. This is not theory, this is what I watched happen in my own beds for years until I finally understood what I was looking at. When you apply synthetic fertilizer, you are giving your plants a direct shot of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Sounds helpful, right? The problem is those nutrients come in a form that skips the natural process entirely. In healthy soil, plants don't absorb nutrients directly, they trade for them. There is a partnership happening underground between roots and fungi, between bacteria and organic matter, and that partnership is what builds fertility over time. When you flood the system with synthetic inputs, the plants stop trading, the fungi die back, the bacteria shift. The soil loses its structure, and within a few seasons you have dirt that can't hold water, can't support life, and can't grow anything without more of what you already added. That is the trap, and most gardeners walk right into it without realizing what they are building. I remember the moment I understood this. I had two beds side by side, one that I had fertilized heavily for 3 years, and one I had mostly ignored. The fertilized bed looked fine on the surface, but the soil underneath was pale, compacted, and lifeless. When I dug into the neglected bed, the soil was dark, it smelled rich, and there were worms everywhere. That bed had not received a single bag of anything, and yet it was more alive than the one I had been feeding constantly. That image changed how I thought about growing food forever. What I started doing instead was simple. I stopped buying fertilizer and started building soil. There is a difference, and the difference matters. Fertilizer feeds plants. Organic matter feeds soil. And when you feed the soil feeds everything else. I began collecting leaves in the fall, not to throw them away, but to pile them directly onto my beds. I saved kitchen scraps and buried them shallow in the rows. I let weeds grow in the pathways and then cut them down to use as mulch. I stopped seeing waste and started seeing resources. Within 1 season, the texture of my soil changed. Within 2, the production changed. Within 3, I had a system that was feeding itself, and I had almost completely removed myself from the equation. The key here is understanding that soil is not a container, it is a community. Billions of organisms are living in every handful of healthy earth, and each one of them plays a role. Some break down organic matter and release nutrients. Some create air pockets that let roots breathe. Some form networks that connect plants to each other and share resources across the garden. When you support that community, it grows stronger and your job gets easier. When you ignore it or poison it with chemicals, you end up doing all the work yourself, and the results are never as good. In my experience, most people fail not because they lack knowledge, but because they trust the wrong sources. Garden centers are businesses, and businesses sell products. The advice you get at the register is designed to move inventory, not to build long-term fertility in your backyard. Once I stopped listening to what they wanted to sell and started listening to what the soil was showing me, everything clicked into place. One thing I tell people all the time is this: if your soil needs you to buy something every season, it is not healthy soil. Healthy soil builds on itself. It accumulates fertility. It gets better with time, not worse. If you are stuck on a treadmill of inputs, that is a sign that something deeper is broken, and no amount of fertilizer will fix it. You have to step back and ask what the soil is missing, and the answer is almost never more chemicals. The answer is more life. Now I know what some of you are thinking. You are thinking that your soil is too far gone, that you have to use fertilizer because nothing else will work. I understand that fear, but I promise you it is not true. I have seen people bring back completely dead dirt in a single year just by covering it with organic material and leaving it alone. The biology returns faster than you expect. Nature wants to heal. It just needs you to stop getting in the way. Here is what I do now, and what I recommend to anyone who is tired of buying bags of things that never seem to be enough. First, I mulch heavily with whatever I can find. Leaves, straw, wood chips, grass clippings, anything that was once alive. I keep the soil covered at all times because bare soil is stressed soil. Second, I stop tilling. Every time you turn the soil, you destroy the fungal networks that took months to form. I disturb the surface as little as possible and let the organisms do the mixing for me. Third, I rotate what I grow, and I include plants that give back. Legumes fix nitrogen from the air into the soil, and every time I grow beans or peas, I am building fertility for free. The results speak for themselves. My yields have gone up, my costs have gone down, and my soil gets better every single year without me adding anything from a store. I spend less time working and more time harvesting. I spend less money worrying and more energy enjoying. That is the shift that happens when you stop fighting nature and start working with it. There is also something deeper that changes when you grow food this way. You start to trust the process. You stop panicking when things look slow in spring because you know what is happening underground. You stop comparing your garden to the pictures in magazines because you understand that real fertility does not always look pretty on the surface. You develop patience, and that patience pays off in ways that go far beyond vegetables. I think a lot of people get into gardening hoping for quick results and then burn out when the magic does not happen overnight. What they do not realize is that the first year is always the hardest. The second year is easier. The third year is when things start to click. And by the fifth year, you have a system that almost runs itself. But you only get there if you stop chasing shortcuts and start investing in the long game. Fertilizer is a shortcut. It gives you something now, but it takes something later. Building soil is an investment. It costs you time up front, but it pays dividends for decades. If I could go back and talk to myself 10 years ago, I would say one thing. Stop buying what they are selling and start watching what is already happening. Your backyard has everything it needs to grow food for your family year after year. You just have to learn how to support it instead of replace it. The answers are not in a bag. They are in the ground right beneath your feet, waiting for you to pay attention. What surprised me most was how quickly the change became visible once I committed to this path. The earthworms returned first, and I remember crouching down one morning and counting dozens of them in a single spadeful of soil. Those worms were doing work that no machine could replicate, turning organic matter into rich castings, aerating the ground, and creating channels for water to flow deep into the root zone. Then came the beetles, and the ground spiders, and the tiny organisms I couldn't even name. The garden was waking up, and it was doing so without any help from a plastic bag. I realized that I had been paying money to suppress the very systems that wanted to work for me, and that realization changed everything about how I approached growing food from that point forward. I also noticed that my plants became more resilient to stress. The summers where my neighbors complained about heat damage my tomatoes kept producing. The springs where late frosts caught everyone off guard, my soil stayed warmer because the mulch layer acted as insulation. I stopped losing entire crops to problems that used to devastate my beds, and I stopped spending weekends trying to fix damage that healthier soil would have prevented in the first place. The garden became less of a battle and more of a partnership, and I found myself enjoying the process in a way I never had before, when I was constantly chasing the next product, the next solution, the next bag of something that promised to solve problems it was actually creating. There is another dimension to this that people rarely consider, and it has to do with the food itself. When you grow vegetables in living soil, the nutritional density of what you harvest changes dramatically. The plants have access to a wider range of trace minerals and micronutrients because the soil biology makes those elements available in forms that roots can actually absorb. I started noticing that my tomatoes tasted different, richer, and more complex than anything I had grown before. The carrots were sweeter. The leafy greens had a depth of flavor that surprised even people who claimed they didn't like vegetables. This wasn't imagination. It was the direct result of soil that was functioning the way nature intended. I was no longer just growing more food, I was growing better food. And that distinction matters when you are trying to feed a family well over the long term. I also discovered that healthy soil holds water far more effectively than depleted ground. During dry spells, I found myself watering less frequently because the organic matter acted like a sponge, retaining moisture where the roots needed it most. My water bills dropped and my plants showed fewer signs of drought stress even during the hottest weeks of summer. This single benefit alone would have justified the switch, but combined with everything else, it became clear that building soil was not just a gardening philosophy, it was a practical strategy for resilience. The garden was becoming more self-sufficient with each passing season, and my role was shifting from laborer to observer. I spent more time watching and learning, and less time intervening and correcting. That is the kind of relationship with the land that sustains itself across years and even generations. So that is why I stopped buying fertilizer. Not because I wanted to save money, although I did. Not because I wanted to be more natural, although that happened too. I stopped because it was not working. And when I finally let go of what I thought I knew, I discovered something that actually does. My garden exploded not because I added more, but because I finally stopped taking away what it needed most. A living soil will do the heavy lifting if you just give it the chance.